Bertie Ahern, Taoiseach for 11 years. You became very much a politician from Dublin, and you became then the leader of Fianna Fáil and Taoiseach in 1997, around the same time as Tony Blair became Prime Minister in the UK. And just before that, we had the first IRA ceasefire in 1994. And then we'd had the Forum elections in 1996 in Northern Ireland, where politicians were coming together to have conversations, maybe for the first time in a long time. And then shortly after you became Taoiseach, we had the second IRA ceasefire.
My involvement probably intensified from the 91-92 talks. Yes. I wasn't a part of the team, but I was finance minister then. So I was very involved in that. And then I was finance minister at Talbot Reynolds. So right through that 93, when we were working on the Downing Street Declaration, I was very involved in that team. And then into 94, which was the ceasefires, which was a great year because it was great hope and great confidence. 95 went the other way because nothing happened in 95. And then Tony Blair and I kind of met up at that stage, 94, and we started working together on the basis...
When he was in opposition?
Both of us were leaders of the opposition. So both of us started working, like what would happen if we were there, what we tried to do. So we had a lot of engagement with Mo and 95, 96. So we were kind of ready. We had our plan in 97. Now he had a huge majority. He was going to win by a cricket score. I had our game down. He was always close. So we were hoping. So anyway, he got in May, I got in June, and then off we went.
Yes, and then, as I say, the second IRA ceasefire came, and that, of course, helped you in your planning because you had hoped to start the ball rolling now.
Yeah, I mean, if we didn't get that ceasefire, there wouldn't be no talk. So it was that narrow window, which, as you know, was contentious at the time because we only had the ceasefire in July, and then our plan was to start the talks in September, which was, problematic at the time.
Looking back then and looking at the scepticism of unionism at that time, I mean, did you understand that given what had happened over the past 30 years? I did.
Because I was one of the younger guys in Fianna Fáil in those days, I did a lot of the student debates.
Yes.
So in various unionist people come down to those. In fact, Jeffrey Donaldson was one of the guys who always came down, even in the 80s. So I got to know him in those, and lots of others, the Magimsies who's come down. So, and of course, we'd always be, at each other's throat a bit in the debates because the motions were always there. But you did get the sense, it was very useful in Trinity or UCD, DCU, of where unionists were at. And it was a very good education because, the debates were light-hearted enough, and the debates were tough, but then you'd meet afterwards and you'd have a conversation, and you'd get the sense of the violence and the victims, and you got a far better understanding than just watching the news or reading the papers.
And you've been talking a lot about the Belfast Agreement, obviously, because we're in this 25th anniversary, and so has Tony Blair. And I've noticed that both of you have been very strong on relationships and trust, and just what you're talking about, trying to understand the other side, as it were, and where they're coming from. I mean, that was critical, surely, to building that trust up until April.
I mean, to be honest, if the way it is in politics, people say, leaders should be very strong and forthright and they should be clear on their views. And the reality is, if you do that, you'll never do anything, because if you don't go in to try and find solutions and compromises and understand people and build confidence and trust, well, you're wasting your space. You're not going to do anything. So I think what I always try to do, I very much honed my thinking around where do you find the middle ground? I mean, where you understand the problem, understand what people are saying, and then try and see if you can be of some use to the process. And the more you do it, the more you understand, because you do see where the other person is at and why they're at that position. And they're not at it because today is Monday and yesterday was Sunday. I mean, they're at it because of some huge conviction in their life. So, that was always what I tried to do.
And I mean, applying that to post-2016, do you think that's where maybe all politicians lost their way a little bit in terms of not trying to understand where the other party was coming from?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. That I mean, I think in recent years, I mean, if everyone takes up their position and you can understand one group do it, the other group do it, you know. So and then it's zero-sum game, zero-sum game, and that's the difficulty. And you know, like, and it's probably not only in our politics, Ireland. You see in America, you know. I mean, God help us. I mean, it's the free world and the great democracy that I loved. I mean, I loved American politics from time as a kid, you know, and probably more interesting than I was in any other politics. You're watching, you know, my father and mother loved Kennedy and all of this stuff, and you'd be watching. But like now, nobody wants to deal, and I think that's where, you know, maybe we've got a bit lost as well. That everyone just sets, you know, their position, and then nobody wants to move forward, because, you know, there's so much in the absence of violence. Then you have to make political progress, and I think that you'd be a bit fearful of a new generation, you know, far younger than me, that they don't remember where all this was, and they just don't understand that we need to make compromises to move forward, because it is a shared space. We still have a divided society. There is the Britishness and Irishness, or both, you know, so we have to continue to work at that, and there doesn't seem to be an awful lot in that at the moment.
I sat in a debate last week around legacy, and Lord Eames was talking about the fact that we haven't spent enough time on reconciliation recently, and looking back at the Belfast Agreement, if you could go back today and insert a couple of things, what would those things be, Bertie? What would you try and deal with?
I think there were probably two things that were a pity. That, you know, decommissioning became a nightmare.
It did.
You know, that was the first thing, and it got us off to a bad start. You know, it's like in my football terms, we were 3 down before you start. You know, and I think that was a pity, because we spent huge energy. Tony Blair and I spent huge energy from 98 to 2003, 5 hard years.
Well, it became the only topic during those years, didn't it?
That's period we should have been getting a good win behind other things. And then the other thing is legacy. We did nothing on legacy. Just the other day, I met Reverend Mason, you know, the Methodist leader. I met a group with him. And there was one girl there who really struck me. Her father was an RUC man, and was the IRA blew her father up, and in the process blew her mother up. The two of them were killed. Yes. And 10 years later, she was involved in a bomb where the IRA killed 6 British soldiers, and she lost her legs. Yes. You know, it was a horror story in her life. You're struck by these things. I know these stories go through all the communities, but, you know, that legacy issue is still there. I'm not sure how you deal with it. I had the honour of meeting the clerk and Mandela here when we had the Forum for Peace and Reconciliation. In the early years, before that group collapsed when the ceasefire broke down, and it never came back, which was a pity, because they were looking at reconciliation and, you know, trying to build a confidence. And when I asked, after meeting the clerk and Mandela, was there any takers for the South African model? And I always remember it, because I was left in the room on my own. All sides didn't want to get into that, and that's 25 years ago, and we still haven't solved it. Yeah, it is a very difficult thing for a lot of victims when they saw the prisoners getting out of jail, and yet they were just meant to move on and forget what had happened. Yeah, and in some cases, as some of them pointed out to me, they saw some of the people who were involved in the Troubles receiving compensation when they, you know, and you can understand, like, you have to get a collective solution. But I'm not saying it's easy, but you need something, some way of giving some closure. I don't think it's possible to get total closure, you know. I because a lot of it's personal as well. Yeah, and I understand that. I can understand, but I think we haven't got to a position that you can be comfortable with, and that I feel comfortable with. And 25 years on, I think if you asked me the question, decommission at the start, now I think legacy. And then the last bit, we should try, I think, to find some way where there can be ongoing fresh thinking of what is the next steps, because... Well, I was going to ask you about that. I was going to ask you, if I'm back here in 25 years with you, Bertie, what will we be talking about then? My personal view, I mean, we've only had... I remember putting in the review clause. There was a discussion early on, not in the last week, but maybe a few months out, and we had a discussion one evening And we said we better put a review clause into this, whatever happens, because there will be times when circumstances change. People change, times change. So we put in the review clause. We've only had one, which you're familiar with, in St Andrews.
Yes.
And we made some changes in that. I think probably if we get the institutions up, and hopefully I keep on saying when we get them up, so when we get them up, I think there is a necessity for review. We have to get away from the position that this is stop, go, stop, start. And
it has been since 1998.
It's been painful. And I think we have to find a way that. Now, I know it has to be cross-community consent, because if we don't do that...
Yes, I noticed Tony Blair's remarks about that. If you're going to do something, it has to be something that everybody agrees to. You would agree with that?
I agree with that, because our whole, the whole foundations of anything that we have achieved, everything, but anything we have achieved, I think, is based on cross-community consent. But the reality is, if you don't get agreements, you're going to run into trouble. You might get over today, but you'll be in trouble next week. So I think we need to try and find a way where institutions, all of the institutions, all of them, because there's 4 or 5 of them in the agreement, that they only collapse when it's election time, and that we just have to get that basis, and people have to, and I think if that's done, people then will accept that's the position. You won't be able to have these you and I are familiar with all parliaments, but if in Westminster, if everything collapses because somebody didn't like something in energy policy, or in Dáil Éireann, and it collapses because someone doesn't like something in fishery policy. I mean, you can't have that. You just can't have that in a democracy. It's just not possible.
A final question I was going to put to you is, somebody said to me the other day that peace isn't a destination, it's a process. And do you think that we have spent enough energy in making sure that it is that process of reconciliation, and that we are moving in the right direction?
I think we need to do far more in reconciliation. I really do. We're starting, when Albert Reynolds and John Major were there, it was a Forum for Peace and Reconciliation, and I don't think we have done that reconciliation. And I think the new
generation, I feel, are perhaps they don't know as much, if you like, as you would like them to know and understand.
And they're not too tolerant either. Like some people, they'll say to me now, sure, the way forward is just the middle ground, and you move on. And you try to explain to them, as I've done many times, so it's not so simple. Your generation might be able to just move on if you haven't been affected, or if you've been cushioned from the problems. But if you haven't been from that, and if I'm always struck when I go to East Belfast, West Belfast. I mean, you can walk down the street and you get opinions that are so diverse, and some people in East Belfast think everyone in Dublin are all in the IRA, and vice versa. So it's no good thinking that we've actually got over these things, and that comes from today's politicians and into the future. I think they have to be talking messages of reconciliation and peace and confidence.
I often find
not digging up things,
Yeah, if people don't, you don't have to agree with someone's politics to have a conversation with them.
No.
And I think we've lost the art of that civic discussion and understanding.
I think a bit of education is of how bad things were is a help when you're trying to go forward, because sometimes, and I find this with students, if I can say those, but sometimes it's simplistic solutions.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, as you know, Arlene, I know, these aren't simplistic issues, and that's a reality we have to understand.
Bertie, thanks for sharing with us today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Arlene.
Thank you.